Alright guys, so first of all I gotta say sorry for the poor video quality. I am on vacation right now, home for the holidays, and the night before we left I wasn't there to pack. I actually had to work a really late shift the night before I left, and so with all of the packing that was kind of stressed, I actually left all of my recording equipment for YouTube. But you guys didn't think that I was gonna skip out on reviewing Rise of the Skywalker, did you? I mean, come on, I haven't made any content in over a month because of all the stuff with school, but I'm gonna review this movie. Also, look forward to a video coming really soon. I'm gonna give an updated video about all the stuff that I've been doing over the past month with my film and film school and all of the stuff and all of the reasons why I haven't been on my channel as much. I'm gonna kind of give you some brief, small mini reviews on some of the big movie releases, some of the Oscar caliber releases that I watched, because of course I've been watching them. If you've been following my Letterboxd, you can see all of those reviews, little mini reviews that I put up for all these great movies that I'm seeing. But in the meantime, enjoy my review of Rise of the Skywalker. So, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of the Skywalker, is the finale to not only the new Disney sequel trilogy of Star Wars, but to the entire Skywalker Saga in general. This is the big finale, it's the big finish. I didn't like this movie, like, at all. Sorry, guys. Oh, this movie. Now, the first thing that I want to go ahead and get out of the way is that this is not a poorly made film. J.J. Abrams is not a bad director. He knows how to make competently made films and good-looking films. This is not Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Solo: A Star Wars Story level bad of a film. However, what makes this film not work for me is the screenplay. Not the dialogue, but the story and the screenplay, I think, is one of the worst that has graced the entire Star Wars franchise, and I'll get into that in a second. But as far as the filmmaking aspects go, I think that this movie was very well made. The visual effects are incredible as always. There's a lot of practical effects that I really enjoyed. J.J. Abrams has a real love, respect, and reverence for old classic filmmaking and all of what the old classic filmmakers like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Ron Howard, these directors that he grew up on, what they were able to do with practical effects. And to me, he shows that reverence and respect here with excellent visual effects. This movie certainly feels like a Star Wars movie. The acting is great. It's what you've come to expect and love from a Star Wars movie. And as a Star Wars fan, I did have a fun experience. Even though I hated the movie, I had fun going with my brother-in-law who also loves Star Wars. We were able to talk Star Wars the entire ride to the theater. As we sat down in our seats, we were really excited and we were talking about things that we were hoping or expecting. After walking out of the theater, he and I both felt differently, but yet we both enjoyed having a conversation about Star Wars. So as a fan, I still had fun with this film, and it's because J.J. Abrams knows how to make a good-looking film. Now, going on to the problems, we have a huge issue with the screenplay here. And when I think of the screenplay of this movie, I think, who wrote this film? And I looked up who wrote it. Let's see, what's his name? Chris Terrio. Oh, what are his most recent writing credits on IMDb? Oh, that's why. That makes a lot of sense. No, in all seriousness, when you look at the screenplay credits of this film, I'm not at all surprised that we got what we got. This one was co-written by two people, one of them being J.J. Abrams, who made The Force Awakens. When J.J. Abrams took on The Force Awakens, he was told that that was the only Star Wars movie that he was going to make. So he was just kind of thinking, okay, I'm going to watch what other people do to my franchise. Well, then after The Last Jedi came out and Colin Trevorrow had been fired, he got asked to make a new film. So he got an opportunity to kind of end the saga the way that he wanted to. So of course he's going to do that. He's a huge Star Wars fan. And the other writer, Chris Terrio, is responsible for Justice League and Batman v Superman, which, I'm sorry, I don't think that those are good films. They're very frustrating to me. So it would make sense that a film written by a guy who wants to try to end the story his way and kind of ignore other things that happened in the last film, and the guy who's responsible for writing two of the most frustrating DCEU movies of all time, more than likely that's going to be a frustrating screenplay for me. And I'm just going to go ahead and start it from there with all of my points. Okay, first problem, this film does not feel like a cohesive sequel to The Last Jedi. Regardless of how you feel about The Last Jedi, it objectively makes no sense as a filmmaker and as a storyteller to make a film that is supposed to be a direct sequel to a certain film, but yet in its story, in its setup, in its characters, and in its arcs, not at all well be a sequel or connected to its previous movie. That makes no sense. When you look at this trilogy as a whole, when you look at The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Rise of the Skywalker, you're going to always see this broken trilogy that is arguing with itself. And that really disappoints me as a Star Wars fan. And I honestly can't blame J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson for this at all, because a lot of people are gonna blame them, but the real person at fault here is Kathleen Kennedy, Bob Iger, and Disney, because when they bought this property from George Lucas, they did not have a roadmap for where they wanted to take this trilogy, and it really shows when looking at the final product. You could tell that this is just two filmmakers arguing one with another, and that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but it ended up being kind of a bad thing. Like, all of these films individually, I don't think are the worst Star Wars films of all time. I mean, when I look at The Rise of Skywalker on its own, I find it at the bottom, but it's certainly better than over half of the prequel films. And The Last Jedi is in my top 3. It's one of my favorite Star Wars films of all time. So the trilogy is kind of spread all over as far as my rankings go, but if I'm ranking the trilogies on their own as separate trilogies, I am going to say overall that this trilogy is worse than the prequel trilogy. Now, I know that that's a confusing remark to make, but the reason that I say that is that the reason that the prequels are bad is because there's a lot of boring stuff going on. There's a lot of politics that aren't very interesting and not a lot of Star Wars-y things going on, and there's really bad dialogue in those films, but the thing that those movies do have is a creative vision. George Lucas knew what he wanted to do from the entire trilogy. He knew how they wanted to start, he knew how the middle needed to go, and he knew how he needed to end it. He had an overarching story to tell with his entire trilogy, and he told that story, and he didn't go back on it, he didn't backtrack, and he didn't compromise, and he didn't retcon anything. He told the story that he wanted to tell. That is the weakest point for this Disney trilogy. There is no overarching story that makes sense, and you can tell that. When you look back at this trilogy and watch all 3 of these films in a row, the films are constantly arguing one with another, and that is not Ryan's fault, that is not J.J. Abrams' fault, that is 100% the fault of Disney, and it's really sad to see that. Now, getting aside from the franchise as a whole and into this individual movie, within the first 10 minutes of this movie, there is a statement and story beat that is presented to you as an audience member. I won't spoil it, but essentially they say this thing was going on throughout all of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. This was happening behind the scenes the entire time, and we never mentioned it to you, and half of the characters didn't know this was going on, but there were certain characters that did know it was going on, but just didn't say anything. You're either going to run with that and think that that's fine and have it not ruin the movie for you, or you're going to be like me and be like, that is the cheapest cop-out ever as a storyteller. That's poor writing, that is piss-poor story structure, and that is just a terrible excuse to bring a certain character on board with this story, and I just was not here for it. That immediately was presented to me. I knew this character was going to be involved. He's in all of the marketing. However, when they brought him into the story and the way that he was introduced, I immediately was rolling my eyes because I knew this is going to be a weak screenplay. It's going to be lazy. It's going to retcon a bunch of stuff from The Last Jedi. And here's my thing. I liked The Last Jedi, but that doesn't matter. My friend Ryan at Nerdy Blurb TV and we had a conversation several months ago. He hates The Last Jedi. I love The Last Jedi. But regardless of our feelings of it, we both agreed that if this film was just going to spend a whole bunch of time retconning stuff from a movie that came before it, that would be a waste of storytelling, regardless of how you feel about the sequel. And that's because objectively it is. You can like Rise of the Skywalker all that you want. I'm not going to judge you for that. Everyone's free to have their opinion, and if you love this movie, I am so happy for you. But objectively, from a storytelling standpoint, it makes no sense to spend 3 films constantly arguing one with another. Now, I will give it to you. The Last Jedi does take a lot of the concepts that Abrams introduced in The Force Awakens and kind of turn them on their head and flip them over in his second film. However, he didn't spend any time in The Last Jedi trying to undo the story that came before him. He took those elements from that story, made a cohesive sequel, and then inside of that sequel, flipped elements on their head as a clever filmmaker. So when you watch this trilogy, you're going to see 2 films that connect story-wise, and then you're going to see a third one that feels like it's ignoring everything that came before it. And that is why this is a poorly made screenplay. It is spending so much time setting up a film that you never got to see because it doesn't want to be a sequel to the film that came before it. So it's wasting your time as a storyteller. Again, if this is your thing and you like this movie, then I'm happy for you. But as an objective film goer who's looking at this film wanting to have a good story that makes sense, it's not giving me that, and that's what's really frustrating. And not only does this piss poor storytelling screw up the storytelling aspect of the film, but it screws up some of the technical aspects of the film too. It really made this film a pain in the butt to edit. I feel sorry for the editor because this essentially is 2 films squeezed into a 2.5-hour runtime. All of it is just breakneck speed speed. The pacing is so quick, and that does not work for this type of a film. If you're making an Edgar Wright film and you're trying to have a highly stylized, fast-paced, breakneck pace of an editing speed to your film, then that's fine. But this is Star Wars. You're supposed to have an even pacing to tell an epic story, and this film doesn't have that. The editing is so bad because they're trying to squeeze so much into one, and it's really not the editor's fault. I feel sorry for them. Overall, guys, Rise of the Skywalker, without getting into spoilers, it's the most frustrating experience that I've ever had in a theater with a Star Wars film, because I felt like I sat down with the promise of you're going to get a wrap up to the entire Skywalker saga. You were going to have a great finale to an 8-film leading up to this storyline. But that is not what I got. I sat down in the theater, was promised a finale, and instead I got an hour and a half of retconning the last film, basically telling me that this last film that I just watched meant nothing, and then it spent the last hour trying to tell the story that was supposed to be a finale, and even that story wasn't that interesting to me. Guys, Rise of the Skywalker is gonna get a 4.25 out of 10 bulbs. So have you seen Rise of the Skywalker? Let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about it. I'm sure there's going to be lots of opinions. Please share them in the comments, but please remember to be civil whether or not you agree or disagree with me or with each other. Remember at the end of the day that we are all Star Wars fans and that we all need to respect each other's opinion no matter what, because at the end of the day, we still all love Star Wars and we still need to be kind to each other and keep this fandom alive. As always, like, share, and subscribe, and may the Force be with you.